host, Dav. I missed my scheduled commencement for 10 minutes, so I hope that hasn't inconvenienced anybody too much. Welcome to the news. Welcome to the current state of the United States, where we don't have a narcissistic psychopath in charge, but there are still lower level narcissistic psychopaths who are adhering to the same formula, which they hope to be tenable. Now, I came across a data analyst who has made some good points that I will share with everybody today. The agenda is to talk a bit about the Californian election in the hope that Democrats are continuing to have a surge of anti-2016, i.e. anti the complacency of 2016, and instead taking Republican efforts seriously, even if they have a clown as a leader, and being aware of various structural advantages that work in favor of Republicans and conservatives, and against centrists, as well as against progressives. Sometimes centrist activists don't want to be too outspoken or too active because they don't want to ally themselves with the popular mischaracterization of the left as being entirely all radical lefties who want to eliminate all debt and who are very addicted to wearing their hats, not as taxpayers, but wearing the intellectual hats of recipients, people who say things should work through virtue of the government distributing things. And that is one hat, and it has value and validity because giving people things can help. Having a safety net is part of having a cohesive, workable society where people experiencing misfortune can be cared for and can be treated beneficently by their government, by that collectivized leadership, people who we elect in a representative democracy to take care of everybody, not in the sense of removing personal autonomy or incentives to work or anything overly dramatic like that, but just by providing cushions in the case of misfortune to help with resiliency so people can fall down and bounce back up again. Facilitating resilience, that's a word that Democrats could maybe work more into their talking points because has a lot of popular traction with parents and probably in the workplace too. Being resilient, encountering a problem and not just getting stuck in defensiveness or blindness, obstructiveness or stubbornness, and instead working for solutions to that problem. That's what we all recognize we can do more of in our own lives and do more of at a collective level, at a societal level. And there are a lot of problems we face that need collective action, like climate change. We need collective action and we need a collective push for leadership to take the necessary steps as well, to do significant efforts to mitigate against some of the long-term and short-term problems caused by the already established trajectory of a warming climate, as well as working to prevent or to mitigate, to reduce the degree of further increases. Kim is listening from the pool, but listening intently. Thank you, Kim. Nice to see you. And Molly's here too. Hello, Molly. Molly is surprised that Trump did boxing fight commentary on 9/11. I guess he doesn't want to do normal things. I guess part of the Trump shtick is to be abnormal, create controversy, and so enhance tribalistic division or cultural conflict. So when he does things that are a significant departure from decency norms, then we should go, okay, yes, that's his modus operandi. And if we give him our surprise, and our surprised indignation, then we are feeding into his strategy of galvanizing outrage and then outrage on the left and then enjoyment of that outrage from the people who perceive themselves as enemies of the left. Zeke's here and says, I see you're still doing good work. Thank you, Zeke. Trying my best. So moving right along to what I have here. If everybody follows Charles, that would be one good thing I did with my day today. Charles is a healthcare policy analyst and also does advocacy and SNARK. He has a blog at acasignups.net/support. So his Twitter handle, very simply, Charles_Garber. He's got that blue tick verification. His analysis is really worthwhile. He's been putting together a lot of composite charts illustrating the proportion of Trump votes in different counties across the United States and how that correlates on a y-axis in bar chart form with percentage of people vaccinated. And then also how those partisan county leans correlate to numbers of people who die from COVID per county. And you can see that there's a sharp division there. But he doesn't just leave the analysis there. He also points out that Republicans appear to be making a political calculation that even if deaths are concentrated in Republican counties, they're still hoping that an outcome of artificially prolonging this pandemic through unnaturally high levels of antisocial behavior and rejection of collective efforts to contain the pandemic, that they will lower Joe Biden's approval rating amongst independent voters who are less likely to approach the pandemic as with any inherent loyalty or gratitude towards President Biden, which a lot of us who fought for him, who are on the left, who are outspoken as Democratic supporters. Yes, so independent voters, their loyalty is not firmly attached, and they may just look at what's around them and evaluate it negatively, making a mistake that a lot of Americans make, which is to blame Democrats and Democratic politicians for their hesitancy, their difficulties in achieving some worthwhile pro-social outcomes because of baked-in concessions, baked-in structural concessions made to racists. That originates with the Constitution, that originates with the concessions made to slavocrats, the type of wealthy people whose extraordinary personal wealth was a function of owning people and abusing people on a skin color basis and on a location basis. People forcibly brought to the United States and then abused. So the slavocrats who owned people and whose wealth derived from that, from their embrace of that ownership, not only at an economic level, but then at an intellectual level, because they made spiritual rationalizations and intellectual rationalizations to say, God endorses this, God endorses my wealth, and God endorses this system of one hierarchical level of people owning and abusing another hierarchical level of people that will make up all sorts of reasons for that being endorsed by God and endorsed by Jesus and endorsed by the natural order of things, and that seems natural to those people who were best able to take advantage of that system, and then also the other people who they managed to bring along for the ride in an intellectual sense, because, I mean, look at all the people who fought in the Civil War on behalf of the slavocrats. Even if they didn't personally own slaves, they fought because they had been induced to buy in intellectually to the idea that they were preserving some of their own privilege and status and prosperity by keeping slavery as an institution in the United States. They fought to defend slavery, and they lost fortuitously, but there is a whole bunch of neo-Confederates who still try to roll back as many of the changes as they can that have happened since that military defeat. So military and political defeat, because there were already some concessions made at the time of the founding of the Constitution. The composition of the Senate, whilst a lot of high and lofty rationalizations accompany the composition of the Senate. People will say, yes, no, it's to balance out the little guy, the little populations against the big, when really it's to balance out the little populations of agricultural states where the voting population was primarily white slavocrats, white wealthy slavocrats, and then an enormous non-voting population of abused slaves, abused enslaved people who didn't have the right to vote. So those small states weren't necessarily small population. Initially, they were small voting population. Once enslaved people were freed and could move about the country, at least some did, which has often still left some of those states with a higher agricultural focus, still filled with people who carry some of that intellectual inheritance of rationalizing that nature has ordained a hierarchy of skin color virtue. Does that make sense? I want to be able to say that more briefly. People blame Democrats for persistent problems with the American political system that are a function of early concessions made to slave owners in order to bring them on board with America's first and enduring Constitution. Concessions made regarding the organization of the Senate, that it disproportionately has 2 senators for each state, regardless of the size of that population. So populations that are predominantly or disproportionately white still have as much political influence as states with a higher proportion of ethnically diverse people, including the descendants of former enslaved people. So white states are still getting to bring to the table their reluctance to share or exist in a society where resources are proportionately shared or fairly shared with people who they have made a practice and a habit of despising, unfairly and unjustifiably despising, because they despise them in order to make their own consciences workable to justify the wealth they derived from abusing other people. Molly notes that there's an anti-mask rally downtown. I drove by and saw mostly out-of-state licenses on the vehicles. Pittsburghers have mostly been masking up with no fighting about it. And she wonders if it's outside agitators doing this. I think it's highly likely that there are people who are funding these type of protests. I think the official term is astroturfing, and it involves people who personally benefit from sabotaging America's collective pandemic response in order to further their personal goals of lowering Joe Biden's approval rating with independent voters, and so increasing the likelihood that Republicans will regain political office in as many places as necessary to regain control of the legislative branch, and so be able to protect and extend subsidies and tax cuts for the wealthy and for the unconscionably wealthy. Because there's a lot of people might define themselves as wealthy and feel perhaps resistance to the idea of taxing the rich or taxing the wealth. I think there's a fairly high level of consensus in American society that the uber wealthy should pay more taxes. That's fortunately become more of an agreed upon point. But some people might still exist who think, well, I'm wealthy, does that mean the communists want to take my pool or my car and give it to somebody who doesn't have a car? And that suspicion is something that still probably fuels the cultural conflict between people who identify as Democrat-hating Republicans, Democrat-despising Republicans, because they despise people whom they suspect of wanting to force them to share. And a lot of their reluctance for sharing is a product of multiple things, a product of conservative right-wing radio lying to them about what happens with your taxes, saying taxation is theft and they're just giving it to people, lying about how much of a safety blanket America has, because America's social safety net isn't that extensive, is difficult to access, and is quite frankly inadequate compared to some other countries that still have functional, burgeoning economies without having to jump through quite as many difficult hoops. So yes, my commiserations, Molly, that the bad anti-vaxxers have come to your town. Molly also saw people open carrying guns and rifles, which isn't permitted in this city. Yes, sensible cities and sensible, decent people who say gun culture is permissible to a certain extent because you can have licenses to own guns, and then you can have guns if you live on a rural property and law enforcement can't get to your house quickly. But that generally speaking, proliferation of guns is a precursor to a proliferation of death and injury and suffering and human grief and loss. Because people with guns sometimes leave their guns unsecured, and those guns then get pulled into the pool of guns that criminals can possess, or people who frequently commit crimes can possess. People with lower levels of conscientious behavior, people who are more habituated to breaking rules and jeopardizing other people's lives. But speaking of jeopardizing other people's lives, a lot of people who don't think of themselves as criminals, as a point of pride, as a point of identity, and as a point of revenge on Joe Biden for defeating their God King Donald Trump, are purposefully sabotaging the collective pandemic response. They're purposely celebrating a personal choice to not get vaccinated, when really getting vaccinated is something you try and do as a community. You try and do it not just because of the individual calculation you have about your personal level of risk. You do it because even if you're young and healthy, even if you have no comorbidities, and you could easily be an asymptomatic carrier of COVID and it might not greatly impact you, you understand that your economy will be better off and your community will be better off if you protect the vulnerable, and you protect children, and you protect your hospital systems, because COVID management is also fundamentally about managing hospital capacity, not overworking your hospital staff so that they have to deal with death after unnecessary death. And they don't have to deal with children in occupying the ICU beds. They don't have to contend with extra shifts and no breaks, and they don't have to contend with alarms of low oxygen level. They don't have to contend with oxygen supplies running low, because managing COVID is part of managing to not burn out your healthcare staff and your healthcare professionals, and not burning out your hospital capacity, and not burning out your supply of grandparents, and your supply of happiness that people derive from the continuing existence of their loved ones, even if they're no longer engaged in wage earning employment. it's a functional society when you go, okay, we haven't abandoned our elderly. It's a disease that still does disproportionately impact the elderly, but now it's a disease that disproportionately impacts the unvaccinated elderly and the unvaccinated people with comorbidities, but also the vaccinated people with comorbidities more likely to have a breakthrough infection. So Molly says they're dying for their stupid cause. But yes, in the Republican point of view, they are also infecting for their stupid cause. And whether or not they're right, that's a political calculation that many Republicans are making. This is one of the reasons why I said, go do a broadcast, Davina, because it's easy for us to get complacent and just call them stupid and say Darwin's working on this problem. This isn't just a health problem, this is a political problem because Republicans are making a calculation that they can hurt Biden politically by facilitating infection and facilitating a rundown hospital system, and that they are counting on people's propensity to blame the wrong people and to blame Democrats for the baked-in obstructionism or the baked-in mechanisms for conservatives for certain people to obstruct actions taken for the public good. I need a name that's not just Republican now because it's a subset of Republicans. Some Republicans will get vaccinated, some Republicans will wear masks, but there's a subset of those people, some of whom are brainwashed, some of whom are doing the brainwashing, some of whom are doing a mixture of both. And they are jeopardizing people's lives, jeopardizing the sanity of healthcare workers, and jeopardizing the ability of children to attend school, because it's not just about how much the disease affects children. If teachers are dying in schools, then the schools will close. 2 teachers died in a Texas school over the course of a week. That school closed for a while and then adopted mask mandates as a policy. But it interferes with children's education when their teachers die or teachers in their school die. It makes people feel afraid. When unusual patterns of death become visible, it causes fear, even if people have been protected from fear. Because I'm now going to describe malignant conservative disinformation, malignant Trump-based disinformation, as like an intoxicant that makes people feel happy. And it makes them happily want to get into a car and expose other people at risk. And when you query the wisdom of their choices, they say, don't you attack me. Are you happy? I'm happy. And we say, I see. You're very happy to get behind that wheel. You feel buzzed, you feel happy. But it's not okay. It's not safe. And your happiness should not be and your freedom to make your own individual choices is not the primary consideration here and should not be the primary consideration here. We are like a community saying, please stop these drunk drivers from diminishing our collective safety. Even if we don't personally fear our child getting run over today by a drunk driver, we can still agree that drunk drivers are not a desirable thing to happen. Drunk driving is an undesirable activity, and drunk drivers should be discouraged and criticized. Now, a Democratic politician who won in a very red seat, but then lost in 2018, but then lost his seat to a Republican in 2020, Max Rose, he said there's a trifecta of vaccination engagement with the public, and you need to have not only education, but also accessibility and encouragement. But then that doesn't mention the stick, does it? Because a lot of people, I think United Airlines has had 50% of their unvaccinated staff get a vaccine over the last 3 weeks out of a grace period of 5 weeks that they offered. So they said you can have 5 weeks to get vaccinated, and after that period, we are going to start docking people's pay for whatever it will cost us to insure you, to test you. And that is at least the marketplace rising up to fill some of these gaps that we have in not wanting to indulge drunk driving anti-vaxxers in our society. And it is so nice to say our society, because I live in the States now and I'm sharing these outcomes with you. Australia is not particularly better off at the moment. A lot of Australia is in lockdown because people are very keen to collectively master this problem of how to contain the pandemic. But the government messed up the rollout. So that's different in America. You had a Biden administration who provided a lot of access to free vaccines for everybody. Some people found it easier to get vaccinated once they were provided with a 4-day weekend, or when steps were taken to encourage or to make employers offer their employees a day off to get vaccinated, to get to lie down if they experienced fatigue as a side effect. It is a luxury to be able to lie down if you're tired post-vaccination, and a lot of the unvaccinated remain uninsured people. So it is wrong for us to just characterize unvaccinated people as diehard Trumpy Republicans, even though statistically we can see that vaccine refusal is concentrated in counties where there's a higher proportion of Trump votes. There's a line, there's a correlation between proportion of Trump votes and resistance to the vaccine. Pablo's here. Hello, hello, hello. And Richard just subscribed. Thank you, Richard. I'm glad you're enjoying the conversation here. Molly notes that the psychiatric hospital has converted their 4th floor to a COVID ward so that Presbyterian UPC hospitals can have beds in the ICU for transplant patients. I'm so glad you raised that, Molly, because secondary deaths is a big problem and is a big concern when a society is trying to manage a pandemic and contain a pandemic, that secondary deaths occur when people can't get the treatment they need. And elective surgery doesn't just mean screening tests or plastic surgery or facelifts. Elective surgery just means surgery that doesn't have to happen that instant, but it should happen soon in many cases. Yeah, maybe the nose job or the chin tuck never needs to happen, but people need to have their, people need biopsies to test their cancers, if they're malignant or benign cancers. People need their cancers to be removed. People need their treatment protocols or their treatment regimens, their chemotherapy for their leukemia, for a multitude of diseases that require hospital engagement and hospital activities that are simply paused and delayed when ICUs are full of COVID patients. And those COVID patients were unavoidable. Well, those COVID patients were not unavoidable before either, but Trump mismanaged the COVID response initially. And then we have vaccines, and Trump's influence continues to be a drain on the public element of vaccine uptake and vaccine acceptance. Pablo is making an important point about the Californian recall election, which is a type of election where you can be elected governor without receiving more than 50% of the vote, or 50% of the vote. So it's an illicit way for Republicans to steal control of the 5th largest economy in the world, because Republicans spend a lot of time deriding coastal elites and people who live in cities and cities themselves. But the truth is, a lot of the blue states are the functional, productive, income-generating states that keep America afloat and that keep America's treasury afloat, and that keep putting money into federal coffers that are then often redistributed to the less functional red states, which in some cases are still languishing in a neo-Confederate decline, just wishing for there to be a rerun of the Confederate War so they could win and once again exploit a serf class of enslaved people to generate money. So when Pablo says the GOP is already saying they lost and claiming fraud, there's part of me that goes, is this a purposeful deceit run to deter Democratic votes so that we go, oh, look, they're already acknowledging they lost. We don't even have to go out to vote. Are they trying to deter people from voting by already saying, well, we lost, but you cheated? Or are they just trying to start, or they're already just doing the background work of establishing that narrative of further undermining American democracy and further undermining American electoral outcomes by winning more converts to the role of election officials who are prepared to act without principle or act in thrall to a subordinating principle, a superarching principle of, oh, well, Democrats are cheating, so if I cheat in favor of Republicans, I'm just helping balance it out. People who are convinced, people who have hopped onto the bandwagon of lies that Democrats are cheating in elections, or that the media is biased toward Democrats, so that conservative media has to misrepresent things to their audience just to balance out what they firmly believe are lies from Democrats. And when I say firmly believe, I would use belief in a very utilitarian sense. It serves them to believe that Democrats eat babies and the Democrats steal elections. It serves them personally to keep voting for and helping politicians who give them tax cuts if they're wealthy. And if they're not wealthy and they've been blinded to how to vote in their own self-interest, for Democrats who will expand Medicare in their region or Medicaid in their region as opposed to keeping their economy in stagnation by keeping people stuck in medical debt, stuck in hopelessness, because that really is very limiting to a state's prosperity. And it's a function of emotional dysfunction. That type of attitude that, was it LBJ who said, was it Theodore Roosevelt? I think it might have been LBJ who said, if you can convince a man that someone's lower than him, he'll let you pick his pocket. Hell, he'll offer. Who can convince a man that pick his pocket? It was Lyndon Johnson. Okay. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. So there's a lot of people in red states with relatively empty pockets who are voting against their own economic self-interest because they've been convinced emotionally to align themselves with the political party that promises them an endless supply of people to look down on. And Republicans characterizing Democrats as Satanists, as anti-religious people, Republicans being willing to do that for power, willing to lie about their political opponents and misrepresent them as demonic and anti-family and anti-worker, in order to feed emotionally hungry people the lie that they're better than somebody, that they've got this enemy that they can hate. They gave them hate food and so convinced them to keep voting against their economic self-interest, to keep voting for empty pockets, to keep voting for limited Medicaid or rebuffed federal funds or redistributed federal funds that go to building new prisons instead of for COVID aid or rental assistance. because a lot of that's still going on. Republicans who hurt the public, knowing that pain, they can generate pain, and that will just supply them with more fuel to keep claiming demon Democrats are responsible for all the pain they experience. And that it's still better to keep having Democrats to hate, to keep fueling that irrational hatred of Democrats as being allies of Black people, Democrats who want to insist on sharing in a way that they're not comfortable with because their intellectual inheritance as part of a confederacy, a neo-confederacy movement, is to try and maintain that Robert E. Lee should still have a statue up, to try and maintain the idea that the Confederacy, the war, the Civil War was fought for noble reasons by the Confederate Army, that the leaders were motivated by a defense of individualism or the individuality of states, by states' rights. All the people who want to keep lying to themselves about what the Civil War was about, people who might say, oh yes, it's important to teach history, but then are very easily whipped up into a fervor by exaggerations and misrepresentations as to what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is anti-racism, but it's anti-racism at a very academic, legalistic level to say, let's look at how our very laws might sometimes be slanted in a way that favors white populations, or that privileges or panders to white criminals or white collar crime, and disfavors people from a certain racial or ethnic background. And how is that codified in our legal system? So that's critical race theory, but because it shares an anti-racist goal with historians who, if they're not racist and they want to teach true history, then they will teach American children that America has not only fought a civil war to defeat the demands of the slavocracy, not only of the South, but people in the North who still wanted to profit from slave-adjacent industries, that war was fought, and then the gains made in that war were conceded when the Reconstruction period ended, when there was a contested election in, let's have a look. Contested election, 18 Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877. Okay, so the election itself, the disputed election, was 1876. There was an unwritten deal informally arranged amongst United States congressmen that settled the intensely disputed 1876 presidential election. It resulted in the United States federal government pulling the last troops out of the South and ending the Reconstruction era. So pulling the last troops out of the South is a sentence that doesn't acknowledge why there were troops in the South. There were federal troops in the South to prevent Southerners from revenging themselves on the Black population there. Because a war was fought to end slavery and to make that consistent across the United States, people in the South were very capable of taking it out on Black people who were freed, but who still lived in those states where they had formerly been enslaved, and who were prime targets for the misdirected rage and grief of Southerners who had been the bad guys in that war, whose motivations were impure, whose spiritual rationalizations were immoral. Yes, and you can see now with COVID how sometimes people double down on their bad behavior. So people who voted a narcissistic anti-migrant sociopath into the White House, and who thus inflicted an uncaring, self-serving wretch on the American public who purposefully mismanaged the pandemic in order to fuel contrarianism amongst his supporters. Racist contrarianism, whatever Democrats wanted was clearly bad for the country and was clearly bad for the economy, and they instead had to rely on Trump, who would be the only person who would dare to oppose lockdowns and the only person who would dare to support hydroxychloroquine, because whatever he suggested was clearly the answer, and whatever they suggested to combat the pandemic was clearly an imposition and a betrayal. And Trump tried to conflate himself with the United States so that if you were loyal to him and supported him, you supported America, and everybody who was critical of him and critical of his supporters, by extension, was anti-America and was a disloyal patriot. Grampy Yoda has made a comment which I'll respond to. He said, so what happens when the rest of the world says to the United States, hey, it's not okay to keep printing money unabated without the rest of us keeping its value the same relative to our currencies? Is America doing that? I mean, we're living in a world where some people have embraced modern monetary theory, which is the idea that you don't have to worry about debt as much, provided you have your desirable place for investment. Your resources are attractive, your talent is attractive, your infrastructure is attractive and promising, so that other countries want to throw their spare funds at you and invest in you and buy your government bonds and invest in your businesses. The idea is then that you do whatever it takes to keep that economy spinning, keep that economy humming along, and to keep as many people as alive as possible, to recognize that the greatest assets in a flourishing economy are human people and their intellectual capital, and the intellectual capital of a relatively well-educated workplace. So people might disdain the American education system, but it's still overall good and very preferable to the education system in other countries. And America is famous for its innovation and its entrepreneurship. It's wildly successful, money-generating entrepreneurship and innovation. So California is the 5th largest economy in the world. Not America, California. California is home to San Francisco. It is home to the people with ideas, the people who are often products of the American educational system, regardless of its flaws, who have generated Facebook and Google and Apple, and who is leading an economy of the mind and the service economy and the intellectual economy and the IT economy. All those types of categorizations of subsets of the economy, that happens when America is functional, when America has a hospital system that still works and isn't overrun, and when America has poor people who aren't dying in the streets but who can avail themselves of safety nets, and women who can actually work because there is available childcare and you don't have to just close down childcare and schools. So Joe Biden and the current administration are doing everything they can to keep America running and to prevent a contraction of that entrepreneurial, innovative energy that America has. So Grampy Yoda apologized to Kim for pulling me away from today's topic, but I hope I've still adequately addressed your concerns, Grampy. Grampy Yoda. Kim notes that university education is good. Yes, I'll dare say it's excellent. University education in America is excellent, but I'm reasonably suspicious of how expensive it is, as if the bar has been raised in a financial sense as more and more Black Americans have sought admittance to the ranks of these hallowed educational grounds. So as if Wealthy white people seeking to preserve the exclusivity of university education have just been passive as it's gotten more expensive. There hasn't been enough fierce advocacy to contain the costs of university, knowing that wealth is still disproportionately concentrated with white people, not exclusively, but disproportionately. So Black Americans have to take out, are more likely to have to take out loans and bigger loans than their white counterparts, which is not to say that there are not white families that don't experience hardship and have to take out loans, but that it is disproportionately the case that Black families will experience financial hardship if they try to take on board a tertiary education, a college education, and that has a deterrent effect. So that it's as if the burgeoning enthusiasm of Black families for the social mobility conferred by tertiary education, the freedom and the opportunity for wealth generation, for access to the kind of jobs you get that are good jobs, where your employer pays for you to have good healthcare insurance, and your employer can write that off as a tax. They can write that off on their tax, which then means the government is subsidizing the healthcare of people who have good jobs. Good jobs where there has been a lot of white gatekeeping that has been documented by researchers in universities who research human resource dynamics and any racial components to that. And they've typically found that there are significant racist components to HR departments. There is a certain amount of gatekeeping whereby people with evidently Black sounding names have had their resumes discarded, even when researchers have controlled the resumes. They've written fake resumes with equivalent achievements and equivalent educational histories, but attached a white photograph or a white name to one and a Black name or a Black photograph to another, and seen the callback rates for interviews be higher for people with white names. So there has been some gatekeeping. I think the increasing cost of tertiary education has been part of that gatekeeping energy. Make education expensive, make interest rates, compounded interest rates, which saddle people with very difficult to discharge debt because it's hard to get away from it. It's hard to be able to outpace the interest payments if you have compounding interest problems. All right, let's go back to the topic I wanted to cover, because this, I'll bring it up on the full screen for a moment. This is Charles's observation. He said, bingo, even if 100,000 more Republican voters die than Democratic voters, it's still worth it to them if it causes 200,000 swing voters to flip from voting Democrat to voting Republican, because Democrats aren't doing enough to control the virus, or aren't doing enough to control inflation, or aren't doing enough in relation to all of the negative corollaries of a pandemic that rages on. So he was replying to someone who said, the Conservative project has always been willing to sacrifice as many lives as necessary to get results. The plan during COVID is to make the pandemic worse so that more swing voters will be disaffected than there are conservatives who die. And it's so important. It's so important to think about this, because at a political sense, a lot of Democrats are tired after the last 5 years now of Trump's influence. And Trump basically not just facilitating racism, but also facilitating the kind of conflict whereby Democrats were demonized in a way that's comparable to some kind of institutional racism. So Trump didn't want to help California. Trump was trying to withhold help from blue states that had that experienced natural disasters or man-made climate change exacerbated natural disasters. So human worsened natural disasters. I want to acknowledge the impact of climate change inducing the extent, the frequency, and the severity of wildfires in California and of droughts and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes across the United States. So Kim said that sounds like a magical thinking thing to you, to me. Are you referencing my remark about university education becoming more expensive, possibly because some white people wanted to keep higher education very exclusive, and by making it more expensive, that was a strategy to put it out of reach of people with less money, and that in America, people who have less money, some of them are white. A substantial number of people with low wealth and of less means are white people. But as a percentage of that pie chart, there's a high number of black people because of the historical theft pattern of theft from black people, theft of their labor or denial of opportunity to take out mortgages, to obtain loans to start businesses, as well as white attacks on black towns, such as the Tulsa race riot and the Tulsa massacre riot / property burning riot and the Rosewood massacre and riot. Kim's referencing the idea Republicans might have, and that's, yes, I'm not saying their calculations are right, but that's what it's being suggested that might be what they're trying to do. Because a lot of us are going, well, why would they do this? Why do they keep advocating for things? Why does Ron DeSantis yesterday propose fining government agencies $5,000 if they introduce a vaccine mandate? Why is he so pro-COVID? What could their calculations possibly be? So it's just being speculated that they might be calculating, well, we lose a certain number of voters. Some of those will be Democrats and some of those will be Republicans. But the trade-off may well be that, yes, we lose some Republican voters and Democrats might just relax and think, oh, well, the Republican voters are all dying, which is not true, because COVID doesn't kill everybody. It just kills an unnecessary number of people, which is too high. Even if it kills 0.1% of the unvaccinated, not all of those unvaccinated people are Republicans. Democrats might be inclined to think so, because Democrats know, hey, if you vote Democrat, you go out and you support Joe Biden, you support science, and you care about science, and you don't buy into all of the Trump contrarian, anti-science, anti-establishment type of thinking. But some Democrats aren't vaccinated. Some Democrats are well-educated hippie housewives who resist vaccination because they are suspicious of it, because they're susceptible to the naturalistic fallacy that man-made things are bad. Some women are so educated that they become overexposed to risks, descriptions of risks, and then they say, oh, well, I prefer no risks. I prefer to lean into the inaction bias to say I'd rather do nothing, and then just believe that my children are inherently safer because I give them organic food. There is an organic food hippie subset of people. And I think that will explain a graph that I'm going to show you in a second. Um, oh, look, DeSantis still blaming the Florida surge on Biden and immigrants. So they're still using a talking point that appeals to not only Republican voters, but to swing voters who sometimes suspect Democrats of being too welcoming of migrants. They suspect that Republicans are the people who will properly defend American interests. And sometimes when Republicans really act out all the consequences of Republican behavior becomes more obvious, then they vote for Democrats. So they're swing voters because they're capable of voting for Democratic candidates, but quite often they have a conservative lean to their thinking and a conservative lean to their suspicions of migrants, and Republicans are banking on enough independent voters going, well, maybe the people to blame for this crisis are not the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers, they're Democrats who have let in migrants across the border. So there's always a very delicate political dance that Democrats have to do with a public that does have some strong culturally conservative leanings, and a system of the electoral college and Senate malapportionment that favors um, voters with a strong intellectual inheritance from slaveocracy. All right. Wow, the Washington Post has published a thing saying top general was so fearful Trump might spark a war that he made secret calls to his Chinese counterpart. Yeah, I was quite fearful that Trump might spark a war. And look, this is from the 5th of September. So Charles notes that approval of President Biden's handling of the pandemic has dropped steeply from 62% in June to 52% now. 41% disapprove, with the rest undecided. So 52% now approve of his handling of the pandemic as of the 5th of September. So now we're up to the 14th. We're up to the 14th. So Biden has since then made steps. Maybe I'll ask Charles if he knows of any updates. But look, even the Biden mandates, even Biden coming out more strongly in favor of pushing the vaccination and not coddling people who say it's their personal choice and they don't want to, and they'd rather take their chances and they'd rather not pull together as a team to end the pandemic, which Republicans are encouraging them to do, to refrain from taking the vaccine because it hurts the economy, it hurts hospitals, it just makes things worse. And when things are worse, some people will irrationally blame Democrats for that. Some people have a predilection for irrationally blaming Democrats, whom they see as allies of migrants, whom they see as allies of Black Americans, and whom they see as allies of undocumented migrants as well. And those suspicions can sometimes be inflamed under painful circumstances when the economy is hurting. A lot of Hispanic-owned businesses were impacted by lockdowns, and that's been suggested as a factor for why Trump increased his share of the Hispanic vote from 2016 to 2020, because they were voting against lockdowns and they were voting because their pain made them more likely to believe Trump, that the lockdowns were unnecessary and only he would be able to stand against the overly cautious doctors and the overly worried Democrats, and that he would let them have open businesses again. Because pandemics need leaders who can make people believe that an invisible threat is real and that real action is required, which is why Trump was so deadly to America, because he did not help people believe that there was a threat. He helped people disbelieve that there was a threat. He helped add to the conviction pile of millions of people that they didn't need to take action against COVID, even convincing some that they needed to actively protest against safety measures, such as masks and lockdowns. And luckily, those people were few in number, but when you see protests, that might help more people say, oh, well, those people are passionate. Maybe I'll join them in opposing mask wearing. I don't know. I don't know what the effect is. Which is why I'm always interested in following people on Twitter who follow the data with regards to those tricky things. Hey, look, I've been talking for exactly an hour. So what I might do now is maybe very quickly go through some bookmarks that I've saved. Okay. Oh, and let's also see, have the results come in for California yet? Biden had a rally. Thank you, Biden. So when the poll is closed, it might be possible to already have a result and say Newsom is still there. So news organizations could still conceivably call the race promptly after polls close at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Is that right? Eastern Time would be 8 p.m. and Western Time would be, maybe Eastern Time would be 11 p.m. and Pacific Time would be 8 p.m. Okay, so I'm in Boston. 11 p.m. for me might be when the race is called. 8 p.m. Pacific Time over in California. We're learning. And Republicans are already, I think, priming themselves to spread and disseminate more of a narrative that Democrats are thieves of election results. And by hollering about that made up story, that fabricated outrage, that bad faith argument that Democrats are stealing things, that Gavin Newsom, a popular governor, couldn't possibly have won the recall vote, and that Larry Elder must have still secretly won, and it's just all theft. That hype is part of their recruitment strategies to recruit more election officials who will be able to talk themselves into behavior. They will be able to argue to themselves, well, Democrats steal, so it's okay if I also misreport election results or throw away ballots that have a vote on them for Democrats, or listen to Trump when he calls me in 2024 and says, I need help, you have to find me 11,786 more votes. And they'll say, yeah, okay, because they're primed via this narrative of democratic theft. They're primed to say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just hitting back. I'm just punching back, which is how Trump would often defend himself when accused of violating America's standards of civility and decency. His press secretaries would say, well, of course he's going to punch back. He's been accused of all manner of things. And he was accused of all manner of things. He was also guilty of all manner of things, and much more than he was publicly accused of. But and he made things worse. He increased the violence in American society. He emboldened the type of people who are itching to fight something. He emboldened the type of people who will lash out at migrants because it's easy for them to organize their brains into a hate party for the other, for people who look differently or people who just have any identifier that they're part of a different group, that they're not with us. Trump intensified that type of thinking. If you're not with us, you're against us. And if you're not a flag kissing Trump embracer, then you're not truly American. And to love Trump is to love America. He made those two statements to be mixed up and conflated with each other, and that was very harmful to the United States and continues to be harmful to the United States. Is it true, Kim, that only unaccompanied minors are allowed into the US at the moment? Is that true? I haven't got my head around that. I had thought that there are still migrants being accepted and that vaccination isn't compulsory for their parents, but it's strongly encouraged. So we'll see. Maybe we can go and look that up. But yes, definitely undocumented, unaccompanied children are being allowed in and housed and set up with sponsors where possible, because Joe Biden doesn't want a repeat of the moral harm done to Americans and the psychological harm done to Americans through virtue of seeing what their last president did to unaccompanied minors or accompanied minors. They turned them into unaccompanied minors by forcefully separating them from their parents and caregivers, and grandmothers, and older siblings. They separated family members from each other as part of a package of cruelty, as part of a political strategy of sparking conflict, and knowing that additional conflict invites additional political polarization on the right and additional indignation on the left. So I refuse to call it polarization because it seems as if it implies a retreat to two equally unreasonable poles of thinking. And that's not the case. With regards to family separation, one group of people retreated to an untenable, polarized position of saying, well, those children deserved it anyway. That's their parents' fault. They shouldn't have brought them. So it's fine that our government is now pulling babies away from their mothers and pulling children and teenagers away from their family members and losing the record so that they can't be reunited. One group of people became prepared to defend the unreasonable, and the other group of people became upset about that. So that's not polarization of two groups of people moving to two different poles that are equally unreasonable. It is just conflict. One group of people departs into a fantasy land where it becomes moral to defend the immoral, and the other group of people became outraged. So you can't conflate strong passion with a strong level of cruelty. All right. So we've seen that people are saying it's unlikely that Gavin Newsom's recalled. Gavin Newsom is making a campaign stop to thank the Get Out the Vote volunteers. Joe Biden's just posted to say California election day is today. On behalf of people all across America, don't take anything for granted. If you want to vote in person, make sure you know where you're going to vote. If you've already voted, make sure your friends and family are voting. Vote no on the recall. Very important, yes. I know one person who participated in a Get Out the Vote call, and I should have looked into doing that myself. I'm not sure if I can because I'm not a citizen yet, but I think even non-citizens, but still residents of the United States can possibly help with things like that. Oh, here we go. These are the graphs I'm talking about that Charles Garber makes. So this is the x-axis is percentage of the Trump vote, of the vote won by Donald Trump. And the y-axis is the total population fully vaccinated. So look, see these, where Donald Trump won 90 to 100% of the vote, only 25.9% of the total population are vaccinated. And then where Trump won 10 to 20% of the vote. 60.04% of the population are vaccinated. So you can see as the colours change and the proportion down the bottom of Trump votes change, where it's bluer, there's a high percentage of the population is fully vaccinated, both doses. Except here, where there's a very low proportion of Trump vote between 0 and 10%, that's different from the trend. That's a reversal of the trend that goes down a bit to 57.1%. And I'm going to suggest that that's because where everything is so blue, there's also likely, I think, to be a higher proportion of crunchy mummies, crunchy organic hippie voters who are not getting vaccinated because they don't vote Donald Trump, but they have an oversubscription to the naturalistic fallacy that man-made things are bad. Maybe they're afraid of capitalism and yes, they've been, or they know perhaps, I don't even know, I'm just speculating and I'm going to stop. I don't know why the pattern reverts a little bit at that level of, see on the far left here, that 57% population, where the bluest of the bar chart graphs with the lowest proportion of Trump vote, and they have a slightly lower percentage population than the counties that are 10 to 20% Trump vote. I hope that was still interesting to people. It's interesting to me. All right. Adam Serwer, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's a staff writer from The Atlantic, and he pioneered the phrase, "the cruelty is the point" about Trump. And that was one of the most searing and widely spread indictments of the Trump administration that spread on social media amongst highly engaged Democratic voters and Democratic leaning people that said, yes, okay, that does have a breadth of reach, of explanatory power, that the cruelty is the point, that these people are motivated by cruelty, that there is, as Freud said, a death wish, thanatos, where people just start to want to exert pain and get into fights and bring death to others. And you can feed that appetite for it. People can have a hunger for hate, for the moral clarity that hate brings to you. When you say, yes, okay, I accept anything you tell me about how those people are terrible and eat babies. Some Bernie supporters fell prey to that death, that hate frenzy, when they started to blame the establishment so much for Bernie Sanders being an unsuccessful primary candidate in 2016, that they then voted for Trump. Or after that, a Time magazine published a piece by a Bernie supporter, former Bernie supporter who became a QAnon cult member, because they had been already primed to be so critical of the establishment and establishment Dems, that then when they were introduced to a lot of propaganda, brainwashing material about how Dems were actually secret baby eaters, they became all in, and they were consumed by that, and it nearly destroyed their relationship. But their boyfriend perceived them as being misguided and managed to persevere with them until they were recovered from their temporary mental frenzy and stopped believing in QAnon. Kim says, personal experience with the crunchiest. They have jumped the shark and no longer my tribe. Yeah, me too. I totally disavow the crunchiest of crunchy people who I like them when they just like yoga and giving children apples and fresh fruit and vegetables and outdoor play and letting children go to the park. I like them. They're in my tribe when that's what they endorse. And when they endorse a rejection of modern medicine and scientific achievement and vaccinations and strategies to end a debilitating a societally debilitating pandemic, that's when I say, yep, that's shark jumping. You've crossed the line, crunchy mamas, and I disavow you. And of course, I have a friend and periodic guest of the show, a former well-educated anti-vaccination person who saw the light and is now a potent advocate for vaccines, and she's trying to do a lot better now, and she is. I'm grateful for the work she puts into her pro-vaccination campaigns. She makes TikTok videos, she has a podcast, and I'll interview her again as soon as her internet is up to scratch. And I should say hi to her today, actually. Kim says hello to Molly. She missed your comment. That happens sometimes. Happens to all of us. So yes, this was Adam Serwer saying that the Democrats can only win elections in California when they're rigged is a good illustration of fraud being motivated not by the presence of any actual fraud, but the ideological belief that Democratic constituencies themselves are illegitimate. I would just call that a subconscious plank of that belief. So I don't think they would consciously admit to thinking that Democratic constituencies are illegitimate. They would say Democrats try and recruit undocumented, or they bring more undocumented migrants to the country because they know that undocumented migrants will, out of gratitude, then vote for Democratic candidates. So I think they will openly make the argument that Democrats purposefully try and bring certain constituencies into the country. But fundamentally, I agree with Adam that on some level underneath, they don't think Black people are as worthy of the vote. They don't think that legal migrants are as worthy of the vote if they're going to vote for Democrats. They don't think people who vote for Democrats deserve to vote. And yeah. Oh, trying to get myself back in the picture here. Let's see if I can work it. But in any case, because I've been talking for an hour and 17 minutes, I should get off the screen. I'm having trouble bringing myself back on. Did everybody enjoy the show today? I hope it was interesting. And Kim, I'm still gathering my energies together to work on the call out as a Substack newsletter. So I know your offer is still there to help contribute to that. And today I got up and I was like, I think I had a good night's sleep. I feel like I'm getting it together. I've nearly got a vacuum cleaner. I just have to be able to have things in my home so that I can get my children off to school and take care of my family and be good at that. So that I have the mental and emotional space to start working on a new project. But I think I'm near that point. There's part of me that might have to also apply for a meaningful employment that earns me money. I might have to try and jump through the hoops that I need to get an employment pass as the wife of someone with a I have a dependent pass visa, I have dependent spouse visa, but to get my own employment pass means then I can get my own social security number and I'll be allowed to work in this country. It might take a few months, but I can work towards that because my services as a speech pathologist probably are required as well. As much as I have an ambition now to work in political commentary, I don't know if it's going to happen. I could still do my Substack publication and it might still just be this very consuming hobby that I have. But maybe if I work as a speech pathologist, then that will help. And one day, once I've got citizenship, I can run for office as well. Vanita says hello from Florida. Hello, Vanita from Florida. And she says, good afternoon, Ms. Aussie. Thank you, Ms. Aussie. Anyway, good luck to me with doing paperwork to get a job and also getting together the energy to push forward with that project of the call out, where I would work on introducing some historical context and maybe even relevant celebrity gossip. So talking about, for example, how Nicki Minaj tweeted that her cousin had a friend whose testicles were enlarged. And she reported that to try and dissuade people from getting vaccinated, to say, you know, just consider these bad things are happening. He's not getting married anymore. He was supposed to get married, but his testicles all swell up. And she was trying to frame that as being a consequence of getting a first vaccine dose. And everybody else pointed out that nope, billions of vaccine doses have been administered now internationally, and that's not a reported side effect that has any validity because it's not reported at all commonly. It's somebody who's likely to have an STD, who's had some kind of a pre-marriage sexual fling and has contracted a sexually transmitted disease, has chlamydia or something, and that is bacterially, or has resulted in a bacterial infection clogging up his sperm ducts in his testicles and is causing the inflammation of his balls. And that's probably what led to the wedding being called off. I mean, people don't usually call off a wedding because you have swollen anything, like, oh no, you've fallen over, you've got a medical side effect, so I'm calling off the wedding. That ex-fiance presumably knows that the man contracted a sexually transmitted disease from extra relationship sexual activity, hence the wedding being called off. And the man trying to blame it on a COVID vaccination dose is grasping at straws. Oh, cool. I got an award from Fabar Fabar. Thank you. And Kim says, good luck, you don't need it. Vanita asks if I have a business visa. I don't. I have a spouse visa. And my children have children visas. We are the trailing dependents of a man whose skills are in high demand. Yes, my skills are in reasonably high demand on the internet, but slightly less well recompensed, which I'm going to blame on me not having quite found my spot yet. But I wasn't focused on finding a spot to earn a bunch of money from doing this. I just wanted viability as a person worthy of listening to. And I wanted to exert a good influence on American politics and to be a point of community, a point of intellectual solidarity for people suffering from Trump and for people trying to feel sufficiently in sync with each other that they could keep up their energy levels for all the work that was needed to do to keep Trump out of office, to keep doing the phone banking and the calling and the awkward conversations with neighbors, which are more worthwhile if your neighbors with independent voters. But at the same time, we shouldn't always dismiss even Trump voters as intractably lost to reason. Some people who are good people but very misguided and very exposed to disinformation sources such as Fox News and right-wing radio, those people might not be irredeemable or irredeemably lost to malignant disinformation. Some people, we might be able to point out something that they can observe with their own eyes, like, hey, look, your sister got hospitalized and they said it was COVID and they said she didn't need to die. Maybe for some people, their defensiveness won't kick in and they'll be able to acknowledge that they were wrong. And that does sometimes happen. There was a man who was hospitalized and recovered, and he said, we've gone too far, we conservatives, with our position. Don't be stupid like I was, get vaccinated. He survived. He managed to get out of hospital and hopefully will live to promote that mindset amongst his fellow conservatives, and people will share that post. Oh. Norma Jean's here. I'll unhide your comment. It got moderated, not by me, but it got moderated by the algorithm because Norma said somebody should start a rumor that the vaccine causes the penis to become larger. Yes, I mean, I've already seen speculation that ivermectin, overdoses of ivermectin are likely to render men sterile. So I don't know if if there's any medical backing to that assertion, but I've seen it made. And that's not something that will help in the long term with voting dynamics because sterile Republican men aren't making new Republican voters in the short term. And it is just another thing to add to the pile of this is a shame and this didn't need to happen. And you've hurt our society, you've hurt our nation so much through your misguided support for Trump and your misguided support for Republican governors who instituted harmful policies like bans on mask mandates and banning women from getting needed medical care, i.e., needed medical care with regards to their reproductive faculties. Because a lot of women who seek abortions are women who already have children and need to conserve their resources, whether they be financial or emotional or psychological. Women who are just being the gatekeepers of human life because we're also the gestators of human life. So it's a role that you can take away from us, but only authoritarian leaning countries go backwards in that direction. So in the last few years, only Nicaragua and Poland and the United States have rolled back women's reproductive legal rights, which is a sign of America's America's dangerous toe dipping into authoritarian waters. I mean, Trump was more than a toe dip into authoritarian waters. He was an authoritarian who escalated his power consolidation efforts, culminating in an insurrection, but not even culminating because his efforts haven't ended. His supporters are still sabotaging a pandemic containment effort. They're still hurting the American economy. They're still causing a loss of American lives, still orphaning American children, still causing the psychological collapse of American healthcare professionals who have been put through too much, and still overburdening American healthcare systems, leading to some people dying because they can't get treatment for conditions other than COVID. The secondary deaths of people who had a heart attack that had to be airlifted to a hospital bed in another state, by which time their heart had lost so much function that they died. Kim says we need you as right-wing propaganda is everywhere. Yes, thank you, Kim. Benita said, can you please educate people more about taking the damn vaccine and masking up in public places? Yes, even the vaccinated still need to wear masks because breakthrough infections are still can still be very personally, I need a better word than discombobulating, very personally debilitating. There we go. Breakthrough infections can still take you offline for 2 weeks, can still give you long COVID, can still make you out of breath walking up a flight of stairs. Breakthrough infections can still severely impair people. So you should wear a mask, because if you are occupying an environment where there is a high rate of transmission, and that's the case in many states now, because unvaccinated people are still the most likely people to be taking risks and to be going out without masks on. So every state where you're in, the population of unvaccinated people are like zombies. They're like defiant zombies out in the public sphere, asymptomatically spreading a disease that might not impact them personally, but that will spread and spread until it causes disabling disease to someone and potentially death to some some others as well. So Kim is saying, yes, Vanita, that I've been on the need to get vaccinated and to wear masks this whole time. Absolutely, for a substantial amount of time. Vanita says she's getting her booster jab in October. That's excellent. Boosters are probably going to be a thing going forward because it's hard. It's been difficult to achieve a level of herd immunity via vaccination throughout the whole world. And we're a very globalized, interdependent world still. So people travel from one country to another, borders are porous, and even if it wasn't just America that had the problem with vaccine refusal, the rest of the world has a problem with vaccine availability. And variants arise, which make it necessary to get a booster shot, probably maybe even every year, just as people get a flu shot. Maybe you can get a combination flu shot and COVID booster shot every year, and that's what it might take to keep us safe. Climate change is apparently creating conditions that are more accommodating for the development of zoonotic crossing diseases, so diseases that can cross from the animal world to the human world, and increasing the prevalence of those diseases. But this is for Vanita, so I'm going to warn people now that there are some swears in it. It's published on mcsweeneys.net. I'm not familiar with that website, but it says, "Oh my bleeping God, get the bleeping vaccine already, you bleeping bleeps." Hi, if you are reading this, it's by Wendy Molyneux. And she writes, "Hi, if you are reading this essay, then congratulations, you are still alive. And if you are alive, then you've either gotten the COVID-19 vaccine or you still have the opportunity to get the vaccine against COVID-19. And holy bleep, if you aren't bleeping vaccinated against COVID-19, then you need to get bleeping vaccinated right now. I mean, what the bleep? Bleep you. Get vaccinated. Bleep. The bleeping vaccine will not make you magnetic. Are you bleeping kidding me? It just bleeping won't. That's not even a bleeping thing. And that lady who tried to pretend the vaccine made her bleeping magnetic looked like a real bleeping bleepwad and a bleeping idiot. So get bleeping vaccinated. Jesus, bleep. The vaccine also doesn't have a bleeping FG chip in it. What the bleep do you think a bleeping FG chip is, bleep nuts? You think it's like some invisible nanotechnology they can suspend in a liquid and then just put it in your bleeping blood and then it what exactly? Bleeping floats around in your body going on Instagram and telling the government that you went to the grocery store? No one bleeping cares where you go, you absolute bleeping bleep off. Bleep off with that bleep. Oh, you're afraid of bleeping side effects? Bleep you. You know what has bleeping side effects? Bleeping aspirin, bleeping Tylenol. You could be bleeping allergic to pineapple, you bleeping bleepwit. Everything has side effects. You're being a big bleeping baby with a huge diaper full of bleeping diarrhea, complaining about maybe feeling slightly tired for a day or two while your asymptomatic COVID case you get and pass to some innocent bleeping kid could wind up killing them or someone else. Bleep you, you bleeping selfish bleeping bleep banana, you unredeemable ass caterpillar, you bleeping bleep knob with two bleeps for eyes and a literal poop where your heart should be. You want a 2-month-old to wind up on a bleeping ventilator instead of you, bleeping adult getting a bleeping sore arm for a day? What are you? A pitcher for the Yankees? A bleeping concert pianist? An arm model? Get the bleep out of here. Bleep you. Get vaccinated. Bleep. Bleep you. So that was oh, no, we're not even finished yet. No, look, this is a long, long article. But there is a lady on HAPS. She's very anti-vaccine. She's a broadcaster giving bad information. Oh, is that Holistic Deb? Because she's come here on sometimes and hassled me. I will mention that to Pablo and Peter. I'll say, look, platforms are taking the Death Eaters off it. Trump's not on Twitter. People have taken steps to try and reduce the amount of death being circulated by willful disinformation agents. So if Holistic Deb is still on here, and I guess we can check right now. Oh, yep, Kim confirms the same person. She comes in to make trouble sometimes. She does. So she's got a platform on HAPS. Well, let's give Pablo and Peter a hard time. Goodness, my hair needs a brush. Okay, I'm going to go wash my hair, and I hope you enjoyed that article. It didn't add that much in a sense of adding points we don't know, but it emphasized them, and it used comedy to do that, and sometimes comedy helps. There is a lady with a calculator. I might see if I've got her. Oh, and a lady who made a rap about the vaccine. This is, this is a lady with the account called Dr. Raven, the Science Maven. Her account is Raven Sci Maven. And she wrote to Nicki Minaj to say she made a rap about the vaccine last fall. It talks about the immune system and some of the things that happen with your immune system after you get a vaccine. Happy to talk about it with you. My space is always just much love. Well, that might help Nicki Minaj. It's a very friendly invitation. Okay, and it's a little rap. It's a minute long.
Bodies, antibody, antibodies, IgM, IgA, IgM, IgE, IgG, IgA, IgM, IgE, antibody, IgM, IgA, IgD, IgE, IgG, IgG, IgE, IgD. The category biology, lesson on immunology, little microbiology. This is a term. I got the vaccine and now you got me on the right night. Be some. They see him, so it's fight night. Antibodies make the haters see the bright light. Compliment they poke holes in chest like a white knight. Opsonize it, that me make it dizzy. Macrophages, they be looking, they might eat fake night. Neutralizes rocket shot played in the together like a tight price. Scary little germs run on fake night. Everybody asking me, what's a vaccine? Scientists in the LAB check for the right nucleic acid proteins. We can try to build up your adaptive immune body, yada yada.
So that was cool.
Bodies,
Cool and musical. Raven the Science Maven. Very helpful. Just talking about how, well, I guess all of the proteins that researchers and the proteins and nucleic acids that researchers work with to try and identify how to best train your immune system to respond faster and more potently to an encounter with COVID viral particles. So yeah, people like that. That's good. It's been viewed 3.8 million times, so good for her. The House Democrats have unveiled part of the $3.5 trillion bill. What we're just hoping now is that Joe Manchin doesn't sabotage it, which hopefully he won't. Hopefully he just wants to posture a little bit to impress his conservative-leaning voters in West Virginia, which is quite a conservative state. That look, he's the anti-Democrat. He's going to push back. He's going to say, have you considered inflation? And then they'll say, yes, we're considering inflation, and you're very special and important, Joe Manchin, and he'll feel special and important, and then he will just agree to passing the bill. So there's two points of view. I mean, some people suspect that he is, the Koch brothers are part of the donors to his political campaigns, which makes it a concern that he's acting corruptly, not just to make a political posture to cater to the type of people who vote for him, who probably wouldn't vote for any other Democrat, and they only vote for him as a high-profile person who acts like he's there to exist as a check to Democrats and Democratic proposals. But it would increase the top marginal tax rate to 39.6%. The ACA's Affordable Care Act subsidy boost made permanent, and child cash payments extended through 2025. So it would certainly help many of the people in West Virginia. That was Wendy Molyneux who wrote that piece about getting the vaccine. This is Rachel Maddow making the important point that your decision about the vaccine may feel personal to you, but you live in a society, you live in a country, and your decision about the vaccine is ultimately the decision that fills up hospital beds That makes all the difference to your society, your community, your country, and I'm going to add, and to your economy.
When Mr. Demonia's family published their own obituary of him, they included this at the end. Quote, "In honor of Ray, please get vaccinated if you have not. In an effort to free up resources for non-COVID related emergencies. Due to COVID-19, Coleman Regional Medical Center emergency staff contacted 43 hospitals in 3 states in search of a cardiac ICU bed and finally located one in Meridian, Mississippi. He would not want any other family to go through what his did." I mean, for everyone who says that getting a vaccine is a personal choice that doesn't affect anyone else, line that up with Ray Demonia's obituary and what his family has just said about his death, right? I mean, your decision about your vaccine may feel personal to you. I get it. But you live in a society, you live in a country, and your decision about your vaccine is ultimately the decision that fills up hospital beds. That makes all the difference to your society, your community, your country. Makes all the difference as to whether a man like Ray Demonia gets that ICU bed or not. Other people's decisions about their vaccine made the decision for him as to whether or not he could get the critical care he needed. His daughter tells the Coleman Tribune, quote, "Dad was a team player, always. He was vaccinated for his own health and everyone else's health. He did everything he was supposed to do."
Oh, that's sweet. He did everything he was supposed to do. He was a team player. That's nice that people are putting that emphasis on it, that it is about being a team player. It's about making a calculation that doesn't just involve what you think your own personal odds of contracting COVID are, or contracting severe COVID. It's about putting your community into the calculation as well and saying, what can I do that's best for other people? I argue on Twitter with one man who's a coach. It's sad for me that he's a coach because he's exposing himself to children, not his genitals, he's just exposing his non-vaccinated self. He's got some level of protection against COVID because he's already had COVID. But he still spreads anti-vax propaganda online, and I try to ask him not to. I've accused him of being irresponsible and frankly exhibiting murderous recklessness, and likened that type of behavior to drunk driving, because I'm interested to see what happens to a white person when confronted with a charge of being murderously irresponsible. And he, I think, feels a little bit bad about it because sometimes he's like, you're mean to me, so I'm allowed to call you names, and I'm going to call you the C word and the B word and all sorts of things. So he feels something. It doesn't just brush off his back. My accusations have maybe upset him a tiny bit, but he finds equanimity because he goes to football games and he says, look, there are so many thousands of people all there chanting F Biden, and that fills me with happiness, and my family are living free of fear and happy. Ha ha ha, you're not. I hope that you manage to find happiness and live free of fear as well. So he's framing his actions, and I'm sure that framing has been provided for him as well by conservative media to say, we are contracting the economy with our unnecessary fear, and he is the responsible person fully participating in the economy in his unvaxxed and unmasked state. And that framing is something I will continue to challenge, both at an individual level in arguments with him, because I'm just practicing and experimenting with what can you say to people to cause them to think twice. His problem is, even if he thinks twice, he goes back to his sources and they feed him the framing that makes him comfortable with himself again. That makes him comfortable with his choices, and I presume his votes for Trump and his embrace of Republican politics and embrace of Republican hate-mongering about Democrats. So that's, yeah, he's a hard nut to crack, and I'm only wasting my time doing it because it's an experiment. And to at least put some behavior behind my conviction that people aren't always irredeemable trash bags. So yes, thank you again to everybody who's watched the show today. It's been a long show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care. Thank you particularly to Kim and Molly and Vanita. Thanks for joining in and commenting as well. And yes, let's all make sure we report Holistic Deb for spreading anti-vax disinformation online, for spreading deadly anti-vaccination disinformation online, because some people in social media companies are prepared to act responsibly and ban people from media platforms for repeatedly messing with people's brains, pretending to have authority and confidence about things when it's based on mistruths and outright deceptions and half truths spun into a pattern of disinformation. So maybe taking some instances of side effects and over extrapolating them and trying to use them as part of a fear campaign to deter people from getting vaccinated, to weaken our societies and our communities, to expose more people to danger, more unvaccinated children to danger, and more vulnerable people with disabilities or comorbidities, pre-existing health conditions, exposing them all to harm. And then rationalizing it as if, oh, well, that's fine because it's eugenics. We're just cleansing our society of the weakest elements. People are loved regardless of whether they have comorbidities. Children with disabilities are still loved and cared for and are valuable members of our society. And we are a better and stronger society when we pull together as one, value our communities, including those vulnerable, and protect them from a pandemic, and exercise caution and get vaccinated and wear masks to reduce the amount of transmission. Oh, and advocate for ventilation, because having events outside or advocating for opening windows, that's a big thing we can do on top of mask wearing and getting vaccinated that people often forget, because the fact that COVID is an airborne disease is often an undiscussed element of this pandemic. And that being advocates for high levels of ventilation is also a big thing we can do for our communities as well, at this level, at a micro level, and then more broadly, our society will be healthier and our world will be healthier, and deaths will be reduced if we can keep being potent advocates for good air circulation. So thanks again, everybody. Take care. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye.